Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Today what we want to talk about is the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. I've got some interesting things to give to you, and this won't be too long of a study, and we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. But as you know, we've been studying the Dead Sea Scrolls for a couple of years, written numerous books on it, published the Testaments of the Patriarchs, several other things like that. Let's see here. We go to our home page and the store calculator. See, down here at the bottom we have the latest book, which is the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and that's out now in paperback, Kindle, audiobooks coming eventually. And that's what we want to use tonight here and just talk a little bit about. I want to show you some things in the book and some of the things we studied, and also introduce a website to you that should be really interested in what we're trying to do. So first off, let's go and look at some of these things. Just to give you a recap of what this is. The modern Jews use what's called the Hillel calendar, which was made in the 3rd century, which is based off of the Pharisee calendar, which was used in the 1st century BC and the 2nd century or 1st century AD. And basically, according to the Essenes, this is a corruption of the calendar. They were never supposed to be using a lunar calendar. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'll remind you of this, that the Dead Sea Scrolls are written by the Zadok priests or keepers. The Zadok priests were the keepers of the scrolls. And they continued what we would call Essene theology. And you've got the Sadducees and the Pharisees having Pharisaical theology. We know the Essenes didn't really believe in anything, just follow whatever the government tells you to do. And there's a few things that talk about their theology in the New Testament. But the Pharisees basically went by what they call the tradition of the elders or the oral Torah, and that becomes the basis for what we have as the Talmud. So the Talmud contains the oral Torah. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain the writing of the patriarchs. And so the Essenes are going to say that the Pharisees made up the oral Torah. There never was any oral Torah given to Moses. The Pharisees are going to say that the patriarchal writings actually did exist, but the version that the Dead Sea Scrolls have or the Essenes have are fake. So they're both pointing fingers at each other saying they're wrong. As Christians, we go by the New Testament. The New Testament tells us that the Messiah came, died roughly 32 AD, paid for our sins by dying on the cross, resurrected, started the church age. The gift of the Holy Spirit was given in Acts chapter 2, and the rest is history. Well, according to what the Talmud says, there never was a Messiah that came, and when the Messiah comes, he's not supposed to be born of a virgin. He's just a man, not God incarnate, and several other things like that. Whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls say that the Messiah is God incarnate. The Messiah would be born of a virgin. The Messiah did come in 32 AD. They actually mapped it out. And he came, one Messiah with 2 comings. The first coming specifically to pay for our sins. So that's all spelled out. So as someone that's a Christian following the New Testament, you're going to agree almost wholeheartedly with the Essenes. And
טוב, אז הוא מדבר כאן על המשיח. אני, כל הרעיון כאן של לשבת על המגילות של ים המלח, ורק לעשות את ההשוואה הזאת בין מה שאני מצאתי בנושא של האלכימיה של הנשמה, לבין כל מה שהוא אומר, כי התחלתי להקשיב ואמרתי, בואי הנה, הכל כבר מוכן, אז פשוט תראי להם. כשהם מדברים על ישו, אז הוא לא סתם נצלב, אוקיי? יש לנו את הצלב בזודיה, אוקיי? אני לא סתם יושבת ועושה בשביל שאנחנו נוכל לראות את הדברים האלה יוצאים החוצה, אז הוא נצלב על הצלב, כי ישו לא באמת היה אדם אמיתי, ככה, אני לא חייתי בתקופה שלו, אז אני לא יודעת. וגם לא חייתי בתקופת שלמה המלך, אוקיי? אז זאת אומרת שגם ישו, גם שלמה המלך, וגם קואטל קצל מספרים לנו שבשלוש דתות שונות, גם ביהדות, גם אצל הנוצרים, גם אצל המאיה, מדברים על איזה משיח שהגיע, על ישו אומרים שהיו לו זאת אומרת, שלוש פעמים, באותו זמן הוא נראה שלוש פעמים, אוקיי? באותו זמן הוא נראה בשלושה מקומות בבת אחת. איך יכול להיות? אוקיי, זה הכל בגלל התנ"ך. התנ"ך הוא ספר אסטרו-תנ"ך, תנ"ך הכוכבי, ובתנ"ך שלנו זה מקודד וזה מוצפן, ואנחנו לאט לאט מוצאים את החיבורים האלה, איך הם מקודדים בתנ"ך. אם זה מתחבר לכם בבקשה, אם זה לא, זה גם טוב, והרעיון פה הוא להראות את מה שאנחנו מצאנו מכיוונים שונים על האדם, אוקיי? אז זה הרעיון, אנחנו ממשיכים להקשיב לו.
Most wholeheartedly with the Essenes and disagree with the Pharisees. Now there's a lot of good things in the Talmud as far as historical, what the rabbis did, what they ruled, what they said. Maybe they do or did not have the authority to make decisions like that, but the fact that there were councils that made certain decisions, it's good for historical purposes. And there's all sorts of little comments in there that we can pull out that actually show interesting information that supports the New Testament from that time period. But the interesting thing about this then, so far, we would go with Essene theology or Zadok priest theology instead of the Pharisees. But the Essenes now are going to say that they're using a corrupt calendar. And you have to use the correct calendar, or they did anyway, because as a high priest in the temple, you have to do, for instance, the ritual of Yom Kippur perfectly, or you die. One way that you could mess it up is even if you are a Zadok priest, qualified, trained, do the ritual absolutely perfectly, but you do it on the wrong day, you've messed the ritual up. So it's very, very important to them to look at the calendar. Now, there's a lot of information historically about this, and we've written about it. Let me just show you a little bit here, back to the introduction here. This is our Dead Sea Scroll calendar book, and talking about the prophecies that it reveals also. And we're just going to go through a little bit of this. To show you some of the beginning here, we've got a section on the calendar history. We compare it to the Gregorian, the modern Jewish, and the Essene history on the calendar, and why the Essenes said that they could calculate it properly all the way through. And then we're going to look tonight basically on the calendar itself. And then we have a section on the ages of time, which gives us the years. We're going to look at, in this book, we look at the school of Elijah, other biblical prophecies, and things from like the Seder Olam that explain how the Pharisees deliberately tampered with the timeline. So all from Jewish documents. Very, very interesting. And then there's a section on the prophecy. So with the history here, just looking at what the history of what the Essenes teach or what the Dead Sea Scrolls teach. And I know a lot of people get confused because some people teach the Essenes are Gnostic and evil. There were a group of Gnostic Essenes that were in Egypt. The Qumran Essenes are Zadok priests and godly. So you've got to understand that. Just like you have a Christian church, which is good, and a cult, it's bad. But the cult claims to be a good Christian church. So you've got Gnostics in Egypt claiming to be Essenes or the real Essenes, teaching Egyptian magic and all sorts of other Gnostic heresy. So we're just wanting to focus on the Essenes. So if they had the same theology as the Christians and agree with us on theology, except this one extremely important point to them is the calendar, we want to go back and look at it. And we see some very surprising things in that. So if we go to the calendar itself, basically, how this works, it's based on the 7-day week, and the Essenes said that it's possible to make sure that we have the 7-day week. So for instance, if the 7-day week is messed up, maybe the true Sabbath is not Saturday anymore, but it's actually Friday or Wednesday, or how would we know for sure that something didn't get garbled? I don't know anything or can't prove anything up to the time of the Essenes, but they would testify that they have the correct document. So we're trying to go by Essene teachings. So what they say basically is that the revamping of the Roman calendar by Julius Caesar in 46 BC has the same week system as they do. So since that's the same calendar we use, the Gregorian calendar is the one that all it did was simply change the ability or the rules for the leap years. Other than that, it's exactly the same calendar. So if our calendar goes back to 46 BC, with the same Saturday being Sabbath, and the Essenes are saying that agrees with their calendar, which goes all the way back to creation, we can pretty much assume that the Sabbath hasn't been changed. It's still Saturday on our calendar. And so that's what this chapter is looking at. But what's interesting, we'll go ahead here. The basic calendar that they're giving, that they say was given by God in the beginning to Adam, that was corrupted by the Sadducees and the Pharisees, is that it was a solar calendar. And the prophecies out of the Dead Sea Scrolls from the book of Enoch, from the book of Jubilees, from multiple places, is that in time there would be this apostasy, and they would change it and start going by a lunar calendar, which is the calendar we have today as far as modern Israel. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But basically here we see a chart showing the equinoxes and the solstices. The basic rule of thumb is that you start at the spring equinox. That's when the summer starts, or the year starts.
פה אני מסכימה איתו, אנחנו מתחילים במרץ, תמיד במרץ, זה האביב, זה אמורה להיות תחילת השנה, גם לפי כל מה שהמחקרים שלי מהמורים, אוקיי? זאת אומרת, שוב פעם, לראות כאן את הצלב, אוקיי?
And we can go back and look at, for instance, when God told Moses, your year will start now. The same month is the first month of the time of when the Exodus occurred. A lot of people read that and say that we used to have this old calendar that started in the fall, and now we're starting a religious calendar that starts in the spring. And that is what the Pharisees teach, but that's not, which would be the Talmud, but that's not what the Dead Sea Scrolls teach. They say that the original calendar started in the spring, and that's consistent. And there is, when you look very closely in the Talmud itself, there are passages that talk about special sun cycle festivals that are done that specifically tell you the original date of creation was in the spring, not in the fall. So the New Year's has a...
פה אני יכולה רק להגיד הערה אחת קטנה, שברור לנו שהלוח השנה העברי יש בו איזשהו עניין שהוא מתייחס רק ללבנה ולא לשמש, אבל אם אנחנו לוקחים את 7 ימי השבוע כשבעת המתכות שנמצאות בגוף שלנו, לקחת את גוף האדם כהמקדש בפני עצמו, שכל התנ"ך בעצם הוא הספר השלם, המדריך השלם באיך להגיע להיות האדם השלם, שאמרנו שזה שלמה אמרנו שזה שלם יא או שלם, שזה קשור באנגלית לסלומון, סול מן, אדם אחד יחיד, יחידני, המילה סול, נשמה, S-O-U-L, סלט, שזה קשור למלח, שהכל נמצא בתוך האותיות הווי או הוואוולס. אז ברור לנו כאן ששבעת ימי השבוע קשורים לשבע הפלנטות, שמש זהב, לבנה כסף, ונוס, וכן הלאה וכן הלאה, עד לבדיל, שזה נדמה לי סטורן, ו6 או 7 מתכות שכתובות בתנ"ך, אם תעשו חיפוש על המילה עופרת, אז תמצאו אותם, הם תמיד ביחד, או 6 או 7 מתכות. זאת אומרת שהכל מוצפן בתנ"ך בעברית.
Always been calculated from the spring. And we go into the book and tell you a lot about how the corruption started, where the solar or the lunar calendar came from and that kind of stuff, as far as what the scrolls lead us to. But just looking at this Dead Sea Scroll calendar, we want to focus on it at the time. we can take the arguments later on that you side with the Pharisees or you side with the Essenes or whatever later, but we want to look at those. And I think everybody knows the Gregorian calendar well that we use here in the United States. And I think most people that study the Torah, the Bible, I myself am a Calvary Chapel person, so we all understand the Jewish calendar as it.
קפלת הגולגולת היא קשורה לכל הנושא הזה של הידע ההרמטי הגבוה, שבעת החוקים ההרמטיים הגבוהים, שהראשון בהם שאומר שהכל הוא המיינד, everything is divine mind, הכל זה מוח אלוהי.
It is today, which would be the Pharisee calendar. But this calendar was basically unknown until, I would say, the 1990s, when some of the other Dead Sea Scrolls finally were published. So basically, the whole concept is you keep a year, and a year is a 364-day calendar year. The nice thing about that is when you keep a 364-day year, you have every year, everything comes out the same. Passover, for instance, is always on the 14th of Nisan, and that's always Tuesday, because 364 days later is exactly 52 weeks of 7 years.
כשהוא מדבר כאן על החלוקה, סליחה שאני מפריעה לכם, אני תמיד שאלתי את עצמי, איך קשורים החלוקה הזאת של קריאת פרשת השבוע. אז הנה, בבקשה, פרשת השבוע שלנו מחולקת לשבועות בשנה, וה-364, המספר הזה מתאים גם ללוח השנה של המאיה של השמש, שמסתיים כל שנה, נדמה לי, ב-25 ליוני, או ליולי, ואז חוגגים יום אחד שקוראים לו יום מחוץ לזמן, אוקיי? כל הרעיון הזה של לוחות שנה לאדם האלוהי השלם, זה שאין ממש זמן, הזמן הוא מאוד אישי, הוא משהו פנימי. וזה אנחנו לומדים תוך כדי שאנחנו מתרגלים איזושהי מדיטציה. ועל זה כל אחד והחקירה האישית שלו על לדעת את עצמו, להכיר את עצמו, את האלוהות שהם אנחנו בעצם.
And so on the Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar, every year the dates are off. So for instance, if I say, when is Christmas? Well, it's December 25th. Okay, when is December 25th? Or when is July 4th, Independence Day? It's different every year. On this calendar, everything is always the same. And once you begin to see this calendar and you go back into the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles and back in the Old Testament, all of a sudden you know when things happened and you begin to see patterns on the calendar, which flat are not there when you use the modern Jewish.
שוב פעם, הוא מדבר על השליחים, הוא מדבר על ה-revelation, הוא מדבר על התנ"ך, הכל מוצפן בתנ"ך. המחקר היחיד שיש לנו לעשות כרגע, זה, איך שאני רואה את זה, זה למצוא את אותם נקודות שהתנ"ך הצפין בתוכו, שקשור בעצם לזודיאק ולמהלך של כל השנה. של פשוט ללמוד על עצמנו, על היקום שאנחנו חיים בו, על איך לחיות בהרמוניה עם האדמה, עם הזמנים שלה, מתי לקצור, מתי לנטוע, מתי לחרוש, מתי לזרוע, וכן הלאה וכן הלאה, וזה גם קשור לנושא של הנשמה, התפתחות הנשמה עצמה בעצם.
So very interesting, it's beginning to prove itself. So basically the way this works then is that if you have 365 days on our Gregorian calendar, once every 4 years you need an extra day to make up for that. If you use the modern Jewish calendar, it's 354 days per year. So about once every 3 years you need an extra leap month to make the calendar come out right. The way this one works is it keeps the sacred Sabbath cycle, and that's what we do. When we get 7 days off, then we have a leap week. That keeps the Sabbaths always in sync. They never get out of sync, and they always work fine, which is extremely important, again, if you're a Zadok priest in the Jerusalem temple way back when. Very, very interesting. So the way this works is,
גם כן, כל הנושא הזה של התנ"ך, שצריך איזשהו מקדש חיצוני. המקדש היחיד שיש זה פנימה בתוך הגוף, והמקדש החיצוני, איך שאני רואה את זה ומבינה את זה היום, זה קשור לעבודה זרה פשוט, כי כל אחד צריך לבנות את המקדש שלו.
You find the spring equinox, and that's easy on a Gregorian calendar. It's always March 20th, right? Give or take a day. Sometimes it's 19th, but you can always look it up on the internet. But as a rule of thumb, it's the 20th of March, okay? So we want to find the Wednesday closest to the 20th of March, and that's New Year's Day. And we start that 14 days later is the Feast of Passover, or the Festival of Passover. So let's look at this a little bit better. Here is a chart of the Essene year, and this is what's really interesting about it. The Essene calendar has 12 months, and you can see 12 months here. Let me see if I can make this just a little bit bigger and do this just a little bit. Okay, that's a little better. Anyway, so here is the, let me go down just a little bit because that is a bit strange. But here is the Essene year, basically. And we have 12 months. So 1 to 12, 3 in the spring, 3 in the summer, 3 in the fall, 3 in the winter. And each one of these months consists of 30 days. So that's a 360-day year. What's interesting about this is they have what's called tekufas, which is the a pointer to the solstices and the equinoxes. So we have a spring and a fall equinox and a winter and summer solstice. And so these days are outside the monthly calendar system. So as you can see, if you can see my pointer, we have the first month, and it begins, these are the weeks, so there's 52 weeks in a year. But you'd start at day 1.
אני רוצה פה להראות לכם משהו שקשור לתמונות האלה, שמאוד מתחבר עם האסטרו-תנ"ך הגדול שלנו. יש לנו את התמונה הזאתי. רק שנייה, הופ, זאת נזיז. אנחנו יכולים לראות כאן את זה בעצם מרץ, אריאס, פה מתחיל מרץ. זאת אומרת שאיך שאצלו בתמונה זה נראה, זה בעצם צריך פה למעלה, אוקיי? הנה. תוכלו לראות את זה, לראות אותם אחד ליד השני. זאת אומרת שצריך להזיז את זה אולי. רגע. הופ. אוקיי? ככה זה מתאים. הוא ישופך ראש ואת תשופנו עקב, או משהו כזה. יש משפט כזה בתנ"ך, בבקשה. תסתכלו על זה, תראו איך זה מסתדר לכם בראש. זה אותו דבר עם זה, אוקיי? הנה פה נמצא תחילת השנה. שתוכלו לראות את זה, ויש לנו כאן את הצלב של האקינוקסים והסולסטיסים. סולסטיסים.
On, and you would go 30 days, 30 days, and 30 days. So that's 90 days for spring. And then you have a tekufa, which is the summer solstice outside of the months. Then you start the 4th month, and it's 90 days for summer. Then you have a tekufa, which is the tekufa Tammuz, which would be that would be the summer one. This would be Tishrei, which is the fall. So this is the starting of fall. Again, 1 day outside the calendar months. So you can look at this as 91 days. So it's 3 months, it's 30 days each, 90 days in the months, 1 outside the month. So it's 91, 91, 91, and 91, making our 364-day year. There's lots of things we could say about this. According to the Essenes, this was the original calendar. It's always been used this way. One interesting thing is a lot of people speculate that maybe we had a 360-day year and then the flood caused the earth to get messed up or whatever. They prophesied that it's not messed up and won't be messed up until the new heavens and the new earth. And what's interesting is if there was a 364-day calendar system before the flood, which they say it is, and We see that in the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, and several other Dead Sea Scrolls. If that's the case, then it's definitely not there was never a 360-day year, because you can't have a calendar system with more days than you can actually have in a year. So lots of information on that, but so these are the way we look at it. So there is what's called, again, a Tekufa, which is the spring equinox, summer solstice, and fall equinox, winter solstice, and back to spring again. And so this is how this works. So with this in mind, the only thing I wanted to show you, and we're going to talk about a few other things too, but let me hop to our website. And back here, this is our store. We just recently did this because I wanted to finally get this out to you. So we have our homepage, which, as you can see, we're broadcasting. So you can always come there and watch it, and our playlists and stuff and other things. News of what's going on with our ministry. And then, of course, we have the store so you can buy our books. And then this calendar is what we just actually put in today. So this calendar takes you to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. This is dsscalendar.org. The main website, of course, as you can see at the top, is biblefacts.org. So we've been there forever. So we've had that name for 20-some years. Anyway, the way this works is, and let me see if I can run this down. If you're on a phone, this is what's really nice about it. Let me just kind of run it down real quick. On a phone, it's going to get to like this. Let me turn that distraction off in the back here. But basically, it comes up, and you're going to see this. It's the Dead Sea Scroll date. So today is Tekufa Nisan. So it's the spring equinox pointer. So tomorrow is the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. So that would be New Year's Day on this calendar. And so on the Pharisee date, which is the modern Jewish calendar, it's Adar 21. So as you can see, we're basically 10 days off, or 9 days off. Gregorian date, right now it's March 17th. The reason why this is off, I'm broadcasting this at 7 o'clock. It's 7:18 right now, on the 16th of March, which is Monday. Okay. This is set to Israeli Standard Time. So right here is Israeli Standard Time. So at 4 o'clock today, Central Time, I'm in Central in the Kansas City area. Then it flipped from March 16th to March 17th. So in Israel right now, it's already Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we just figured it's probably better to sync all time as far as studying prophecies with Israeli time or Jerusalem time. So that's what we've got. So March 17th, it's a Tuesday, it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Jerusalem, and it's Tekufa Nisan already. And of course, our date is 5944, because tomorrow is New Year's, and it'll actually be 5945. So the other thing about this site here is you've got the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a YouTube playlist of my teachings, and there are 15 YouTube videos, and we will be redoing those sometime too to make them a little more succinct. And then other books that pertain only to Dead Sea Scroll studies, like the calendar down here. So that's what we've got. But in the middle here are full calendars. So here's a DSS Gregorian calendar we're going to look at in a minute for the year 2019. So that's March 2019 to March 2020. Now this next year, which starts tomorrow, technically, is March 2020 to March of 2021. And so those are those two. You can also do a search by a year. So for instance, I was born in 1965. So if I put in 1965 and then hit return, I get a 1965 year chart, as you can see here. And let me go ahead and run that back out. I've got it. It'll be easier to see if we go ahead and do this. And it's a little off, so let me adjust it here. Okay, there we go. That's better. So anyway, 1965, as you can see, it was 59 or 5890 back then. And so this is what I wanted to show you. So you can type in whatever year you're looking for, 1948, 1967. It's a perpetual calendar. So we've done this with HTML and PHP as a backend. And whenever you go to this site, it automatically takes this part here at the top, automatically takes whatever today is. So you go to this website, it knows today is March 16th and the time, and it's 2020 on the Gregorian calendar. It takes, and it's a Monday night. So it takes all those pieces and then recalculates everything for those calendar parts. So let's look at this. This right now, it's March 19 to 20. Let's look at this first one. So in 2019, March 20th was the first day closest to the spring equinox. And actually, that was the spring equinox, March 20th. And so there's some people that say that you want to change this, we'll look at that later, but depending on how you do the calculations for the first day of the year. But they're always like this. It's always the Wednesday, because according to what the Essenes said, the sun, moon, and stars were created on the fourth day of the week. Therefore, the fourth day of the week is the start of the calendar, or New Year's. And as you can see, we've got the Tekufa Nisan, which is the first day of spring, or this is actually the pointer for the spring equinox. Now, you're going to say, I'm sure it's like, that's not the exact equinox. And what we're going to see is when you have a 364-day calendar, the equinox will shift back 1 or 2 days every year. That's why we need a leap year every so often. And the leap year gives us the week to put it back. So it keeps cycling back and forth. So as you can see here, then the Passover is the 14th of Nisan. This last year, it was April 2nd. And we've got unleavened bread, first fruits of the barley harvest, etc. And we get down to Adar. And so this is where we're at now. This is March, today's the 16th. So March 16th is a Monday. It's Monday, so that's correct. So right now in Kansas, it is the 30th of Adar on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And we're using the same Hebrew names, Adar, and those just for sake of understanding. Originally, the months were just numbered, as were the days of the week. Later on, they took on names, and that's got nothing to do with paganism. Anyway, so tomorrow then will be Tuesday, the Tekufa Nisan, the start of spring, and then right here would be New Year's Day. So let me back up and let's go with that one.
רק הערונת קטנטונת, כי אני מקשיבה ביחד איתכם. אדר, ניסן, תמוז, תשרי, אנחנו יודעים שזה חודשים של אלים בבליים, אוקיי? כדאי לשים את זה על השולחן, אין מה לעשות, זה לא המצאה יהודית, אוקיי? זה המצאה בבלית, שומרית בבלית.
So starting tomorrow, which will be Tuesday, that'll be the first day of spring, and it will be March 18th. So that's correct. So today is Monday, the 16th, 17, 18. What I wanted to show you on this, and I'll let you look at this. If you see any errors, we've had problems with buttons not working when you click on them and different things. So let's see here, and then we'll go to the chat room and see what kind of questions you have. But here's Passover, and I thought it was interesting because on this calendar, if you go to Pentecost, which is here, which is always the 15th of Sivan on their calendar, it turns out to be May 31st, which is Pentecost Sunday on our calendar too. So that's really interesting. But one of the things I wanted to give you on this is really interesting on how they do this. So let's start here. Passover is the 14th of Nisan, and we have Jesus resurrecting 3 days and 3 nights later. So this is interesting if you look at this. At first I thought it was off.
אוקיי, חברים, פה הוא מדבר על הרזורקשן של ישו. אם אנחנו מסתכלים על לוח השנה, כעל לידתה של השמש, אז האקינוקס של ניסן, של בעצם תחילת השנה, הוא העלייה לתוך מצב מלא של השמש. אוקיי, אז לא סתם שיש כאן את כל הדברים האלה שקשורים לישו, וההתעוררות שלו, הלידה מחדש שלו, אוקיי? הלידה מחדש בתכלס היא אמורה לקרות בסולסטיק ב-21 לדצמבר, ששם הימים גדלים יום אחרי יום, יש לנו יותר ויותר אור.
Like he died on Friday, resurrected the next morning, which is 3 days and 3 nights. So we've always had problems with that. But if Passover, March 31st this year, but if the Passover on the Tuesday, he went and had the Passover Seder with his disciples, then was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane during the night, and was put on the cross on the 15th, which would be Wednesday. And then he had...
שימו לב, הוא עלה, שמו אותו על הצלב, אוקיי? אנחנו ראינו תמונות של הצלב, זאת אומרת, בואו רק נזכר בזה עוד פעם, כי זה אחד הדברים הכי חשובים, אני חושבת, להבין כאן את הנושא הזה, שהצלב מדבר על האקינוקסים ועל האקינוקסים והסולסטיס, אוקיי? זאת אומרת, זה כמו שעון קוסמי ענק בעצם. זה הכל מוצפן בתנ"ך ובכתבים, בברית הישנה, בברית החדשה.
To be killed one way or the other and taken down off the cross and buried before the 15th started, which is that evening. And so at that point he's dead the evening of the 15th. So the first day is the evening of the 15th, which is Wednesday evening, basically. Wednesday evening and Thursday. Thursday evening and Friday is the second day. Friday evening and Saturday is the third day. So after 3 full days and nights, we would be there at Saturday night. And notice the scripture says Sunday morning when they came to check, the stone was rolled away and he was already gone. So this actually fits the gospel narrative much better than Friday or Thursday or Wednesday or whatever. Just thought that was interesting. So he's going to resurrect on Resurrection Sunday, which is the Sunday of unleavened bread. And then they place the first fruits the week after, or the Sunday rather, after the Passover week. We usually place it right here, and they place it here. But what's interesting is they're going to say, here's first.
אגב, כל התפילות שקשורות ללחם, תן לי את לחם יומי, זה להעלות את השמן של הקונדוליני למעלה בעצם, אוקיי? זה קשור לעלייה שלנו בתוך עצמנו, בסולם יעקב הזה שהוא הצ'קרות שלנו.
First fruits, and then you're going to count 7 days. So if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is the 7th day of what's called the counting of the Omer. And that's the 50-day count to Pentecost. And so we go on down through here, and this is the 49th day. Pentecost then is the 50th day, and this is Pentecost Sunday. We all know that, but what we didn't know is that there were hidden from us 2 other festivals. From Pentecost Sunday, you start a count, which is a count to the festival of new wine. It's another 50-day count.
בינינו ספירת העומר, אם אני לא חקרתי את זה לעומק, אבל רק מהשמיעה אני מבינה שיש לנו כאן שוב פעם, זה כנראה ימים מאוד מאוד מיוחדים של עליית הקונדוליני, של כל מה שקורה בשמיים, מכיוון שזה תחילת השנה וזה הכוח הכי גדול, שבעצם ייתן את כל האמפקט לשנה הבאה. זאת אומרת שאם אנחנו עושים איזושהי עבודה פנימית בתקופה הזאת, שהיא ספירת העומר, שהיא כנראה איזושהי עלייה מדיטטיבית כלפי מעלה, זה כנראה חלק מהתהליך הזה של האדם השלם לפתח בתוך עצמו.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is 7. So when we go 14, 21, which is past the summer, 28, 35, 42, 49, and then on the 3rd of Av is the first fruits of new wine. And that is a festival for the age of grace, according to what the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about. Now, look at this again. So from this point,
תחשבו על זה, זה איסוף הפירות. במשך כל השנה גידלנו את העצים, את הפירות, וזה הזמן לקטוף את הפירות. זה לא רק תכלס בשדה או בקטיף של איזשהו בוסתן של פירות, אלא זה גם יולי כבר, אנחנו מתקרבים באזור ה-21 ליולי, שזה יוצא כאן, זה יוצא שיא הקיץ, אוקיי? זה יוצא הסולסטיק של הקיץ, זאת אומרת, השמש במרום האנרגיה של הזהב, אוקיי? זה הזהב שיש לנו בגוף, צ'קרת הכתר בעצם. אז זה מתאים מבחינת, זה לא סתם גם שמו את האריה שם, אריה שהוא שיא הקיץ.
And on, we start another 50-day count from the first fruits of new wine, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is a count to the festival of new oil. So as we go through here...
בבקשה, מדברים על שמן. אנחנו מדברים על להעלות את השמן של הקונדוליני מצ'קרת הבסיס לכתר, לזהב.
And we get to number 49, the 50th day is the first fruits of new oil, which is always on Sunday, the 22nd of Elul. And then we have a 1-week wood offering. And then you've got 2 days, and then of course you have the Tekufa and the Tishrei.
שוב פעם, ספטמבר, אנחנו מגיעים פה למה שעומד בדיוק ממול האקינוקס של מרץ, זה בדיוק הצד השני שלו, אוקיי? זאת אומרת שאם במרץ היה לנו מזל תלה, היה לנו את הכניסה לקיץ, פה אנחנו נכנסים לסתיו. סליחה, כניסה לאביב, פה יש לנו כניסה לסתיו. זה בדיוק הצד השני של המעגל.
And then you have the fall day of remembrance, or the first day of fall, which is the festival of trumpets. So what's interesting to this, and what I wanted to draw your attention to, this is amazing, because we don't just have a 50-day count to Pentecost. We have first fruits of the barley, 50 days later Pentecost, 50 days later first fruits of new wine, which is the grape harvest, 50 days later new oil, which is the olive harvest. And these are all prophecy type rituals that point to the age of grace. And it's important for us that are Christians to understand these prophecies. We know about Passover, and we know about first fruits, and we know about Pentecost, the giving of the Holy Spirit, and it's tied in with the law and several other things.
חשוב לי לציין כאן רק דבר מאוד קטן, שאני לא נוצריה, נולדתי יהודייה, אבל אני רואה את עצמי מעל הדתות, משהו אוניברסלי, וזה בעצם המסר שאני רוצה לעשות כאן חיבור למי שזה מעניין אותו, שגם הנצרות וגם היהדות בעצם מדברות על אותו דבר, והידע הזה הוא ידע נשכח, ואנחנו מנסים לעשות פה חיבורים בין האלכימיה של הנשמה לבין מגילות קומראן בעצם. זאת אומרת, זה לא קשור לאף דת, זה קשור לידע מדעי הנשמה, מדעי החיים ההרמוניים עם האדמה ועם הגוף הפיזי שלנו.
But there's a whole large group of teaching that the Essenes gave on these festivals, and they're really, really interesting. One thing I want to draw your attention to is each one of these festivals is on a Sunday. And what's interesting is, in the first century, there was a debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees to whether, let me just back up here real quick. In Nisan, here's Passover, so it is first fruits. Is that supposed to be the day after the weekly Sabbath, which would be Sunday, or is it the day after the high Sabbath, which would actually be Wednesday, the day after Passover? Or maybe they considered this one, so it'd be Thursday. So there's this debate on which Sabbath we're talking about, a high Sabbath, a festival, or a low Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath.
זהו, שאני תכלס בינינו כל החישובים האלה, השבת הזאת, השבת ההיא, 4 ימים מכאן, 3 ימים מכאן, צריך לשמור על זה משהו מאוד בסיסי, אני לא נכנסת לכל הפרטים האלה, אבל טובת מי שרוצה לשמוע את מה שיש לי להגיד, ואיך אני רואה את החיבורים האלה עם המגילות קומראן, אז אנחנו נמשיך.
And what's interesting about that is when you flip those around, since they're 50-day counts, all of a sudden you don't have any festivals on Sunday. And when you do it the Essene way, all the festivals for the Age of Grace are on Sunday. What I thought was really fascinating was this whole concept of, like in Matthew 24 and 25, this Jesus teaching on the end times. And in chapter 26, it says, he finished that sermon and said, now you know that the Passover is 2 days from now. So let's look at this. Here's the Passover. 2 days prior to this date would be a Sunday. So that was a Sunday sermon that he gave to his disciples. Every time Jesus resurrected, or appeared rather, after the resurrection, was always on a Sunday. So what we're seeing here, we got a lot of people that are saying Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday and he didn't have authority to do it, and it's all pagan and all this other junk. None of it's pagan.
אגב, סנדיי זה היום של השמש בעצם, זה מה שאומר הזהב, אוקיי? שבת היא יותר היום שאנחנו קוראים לזה בעברית, ואז אנחנו נסתכל על זה כעל היום של הזהב, אבל האם זה באמת משנה כל עוד אנחנו בתוך עצמנו, לא בחוץ, כי זה as within so without, כמו שבפנים ככה בחוץ, כמו שלמעלה ככה למטה, כמו שהנשמה כך היקום.
But what's interesting here is we have a history of the Sabbath being very important, but at least certain Sundays are very important. The first day of the week, the new beginning of things. So very, very important to study. So these things I think are really interesting because Passover teaches on the, as you know, the death of the Messiah, which is the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. You have the death, burial, and resurrection.
אוקיי, פה אני רוצה עכשיו להראות לכם תמונה, הוא מדבר על המשיח, הוא מדבר על הכבש, מה שנקרא. יש לנו כאן את הטבולה סמארט מדינה. אז מה שאני רוצה להראות לכם כאן זה שבזמנו שבסרט אני מדברת על הדבר הזה, אנחנו יכולים לראות בעצם את הקו הישר האנכי של למעלה למטה, את האלכימאי שנמצא בחלק הפיזי, אוקיי? שזה החלק השמימי, יש לו את הצד הגברי, יש לו את הצד הנשי, וזה משהו שנמצא בתוך האדם עצמו ואנחנו צריכים לחבר. אוקיי? אז יש לנו כאן את המתכות, יש לנו כאן את כל החיות בזודיה כאילו, או באלכימיה של הנשמה, שזה 5 שלבים שהם קורים בתוך הנפש. יש לנו כאן את מה שנקרא המשולש העליון, הרוחני, מול המשולש התחתון, אוקיי? שזה בעצם המגן דוד, כמו שלמעלה ככה למטה, ופה יש לנו בעצם את ההתמרה של הצד האגואיסטי החיצוני. אגב, אוקיי, אתם רואים כי הוא שמש, גבר, הצד הגברי שלנו הוא שמש, הוא אריה, והצד הנשי הוא אולי, זה כל מה שקשור לתת מודע, ולתעתועים אולי, או לדמיון, או לתת מודע הקולקטיבי גם, אוקיי? ויש לנו כאן את השמש שמייצגת זהב, את הלבנה שמייצגת את הכסף או את הירח, ופה הצד הגברי בעצם עובר איזושהי אלכימיה והופך להיות תלה. שאם אנחנו יכולים להסתכל טוב, יש לו, זה כבר לא תלה שמובילים אותו, איך אומרים? מובילים אותו הוא כבר מנהיג של עצמו, אוקיי? והמשרה תהיה על כתפיו, זה כתוב לנו בתנ"ך, ופה יש לנו את הצד הנשי, שבהתמרה האלכימאית שלו הופך להיות יונה לבנה, ואת היהובה, שעד היום אני לא יודעת אם זה באמת, זה מה שנכון, או שזה פשוט איזשהו אור אינסוף, כי הכל היה מוצפן.
And during the week of unleavened bread, first fruits of the barley harvest then points to our new birth, being born of the Spirit. And when you get to Pentecost, it's the gift of the Spirit, and it talks about being the indwelling of the Spirit, progressive sanctification as you grow and learn to become mature in Messiah. Then you get to the festival of new wine, which is connected with weddings. And we won't go into all the details, but there's quite a bit of details from the Dead Sea Scrolls on this stuff. And we see a glimpse of it being reinstituted by Nehemiah in Nehemiah chapter 13. And we see another glimpse of the ritual that was done on new wine at the end of the book of Judges, which is pretty interesting. It was a ritual done at Shiloh, which makes sense, new wine, olives, or grapes rather. But it talks about the wedding, and that whole concept is being entirely sanctified, devoted to your wife, which is the concept of the bride of Christ being devoted to the Messiah.
שוב פעם, בשביל חתונה פיזית חיצוני, אנחנו קודם כל צריכים לעשות איזושהי חתונה פנימית בין הצד הגברי והנשי שלנו, בשביל להגיע להיות האדם השלם. רק אחרי שאנחנו הופכים להיות האדם השלם, שהחלקים שלו באמת שווים, אז אם נמצא מישהו בן זוג שמתאים לנו באותה רמה, זה יכול להיות נפלא, וזה בטוח מה שנקרא נשמות תאומות ומשלימות, אבל קודם כל יש לנו לעבוד על האלכימיה בתוכנו.
Finally mature in the Lord, you are reproducing, so to speak, in the marriage. So in other words, you are discipling people, you're leading people to the Lord, etc. The last thing that is very important is the festival of new oil. And oil is used for lamps. And you have all these marriage concepts and wine concepts and oil and lamp concepts and light concepts all through Jesus' epistles, his teachings, and Paul in the epistles also. So you've got all these things, and these all point to, when you group them together and look at them, they all point to the importance of prophecy. So it's fascinating to me to see that it's natural that they would want to get rid of those other two. The whole concept of the two people, the Jews and the Gentiles, becoming the one new man in Messiah. We're not Hebrew roots, and we're not Noahides. We're not Gentiles. We're not Jews. We are...
מה שהוא אומר כאן עכשיו, זה כבר יותר מתחבר לי במובן האוניברסלי, שהמילה יהודי היא לא שייכת רק ליהודים, כי שמו עלינו איזושהי תווית יהודית, ובתעודת לידה כתוב לי שאני בלאום של יהודייה. וגם אם זה אומר שאני מודה, כי יהודי בא מלשון הודיה. אני חושבת שכל נשמה שהיא מחוברת לבורא ויכולה להודות ולהגיד תודה, היא באיזשהו מקום יהודייה, וזה לא קשור לאיזשהו חותמת של אבא או של אמא או מה שזה לא יהיה, זה משהו מאוד פנימי שקשור לטוהר של אותה נשמה, ולכן המילה גוי, גויים, גופה, הוא בא בעצם מהחתונה בין החלק הגבוה הרוחני לחלק הגופני הפיזי, זאת אומרת החלק היהודי עם החלק הפיזי. שפה אפשר למצוא את המצב האנכי של מה שלמעלה ומה שלמטה ולחבר ביניהם מבחינת שמיים וארץ. זה מה שנקרא החתונה של שמיים וארץ. היא קודם כל פנימית.
Are believers in Messiah. We're messianic. We are Christians, in other words. And so this concept of trying to divide us is something that mature people do not do. And the whole concept of looking at prophecy is understanding all these prophecies and how they fit in with everything that we have. And there are a lot of other prophecies in there that are given in the scrolls. So I basically wanted to give this to you as an overview of this. So again, when we go to, let me get back out of this, if you go to the Bible Facts website, homepage or store.
אני קצת אעביר קדימה כי הוא שוב פעם עושה פרסומות. אוקיי, פה הוא כבר מפסיק.
Just going to go to this year's. So this is 2020. And of course this is, yeah, all right. It's already starting with the Takufa. So it's already on this calendar. So this is 2020, 59:45. And this is Tuesday. So we tried to do a lot of stuff and work the bugs out. This button was not working for the longest time. We got that finished today. So lots of other things. There may still be other bugs in that, but this is the calendar system.
סליחה שאני קצת מעבירה עוד פעם
In
קדימה.
Av, it's the 3rd of Av. So it's always Sunday, the 3rd of Av. It's a festival for the age of grace, the church age. So festival of first fruits of new wine.
גם היה פה תרגום לא משהו עם הטלפים, אבל לכו תדעו, זה קשור לשנת הקורונה, מעניין. בגוגל מתרגם לנו אחלה.
The 3rd of Av. So in John chapter 2, the first 2 verses, it says there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee on the 3rd day. And you don't have to go any further. It was obviously the 3rd of Av. It was the festival of new wine. So what did Jesus end up doing at that festival? He changed the water into wine. And you begin to see a lot of things. We may not absolutely know what the ritual...
שוב פעם, אנחנו לא יודעים מהו בדיוק הטקס המסוים שישו עשה בשביל להפוך את המים ליין, כי זה קשור לאלכימיה של הנשמה. המים הם רגשות, וברגע שהוא הפך את זה ליין, הוא הפך את זה לאיזשהו ספיריט, אוקיי? משהו שהוא מעל הרגשות. לחפש כל הזמן איזה שהם תקסים מסוימים בשביל לעשות את זה בחוץ, זה רק משהו שאמור לחזק את העבודה הפנימית. אז אני לא מבינה כאן באמת את כל הנושא הזה של החיפוש החיצוני, אבל זה מעניין.
Is of this date enough to pull it all together, but you can see the patterns consistently coming up in these things. So really, really interesting. So let me turn this off for a second here, and we'll go to...
אני אעשה פה הפסקה, ואנחנו נמשיך בפרק הבא.